Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. An original adaptation written and read for you by Jon Buckeridge. Part 19. The Green Girdle. After a long, sleepless night, Gawain felt drawn and jagged. Sunlight arrived with terrible inevitability on Gawain's final day of freedom. Tomorrow he would have to ride out at long last to find the Green Chapel and face the Green Knight. The looming spectre who had cast such a shadow over the last year of Gawain's life was almost upon him, and he was horribly helpless. Somewhere in his sleep-deprived mind he knew that he should be taking advantage of this last day, luxuriating in all the activities he'd wanted to do for so long, eating a final meal, singing a final song, dancing a final dance, but he didn't have the heart. Leave no day unseized, the voice in his head reminded him, but he ignored it. When the now familiar tap-tap-tapping came at his door, he welcomed the interruption, anything to distract his mind from its circles of thought, but he said nothing. The door crept open, and Lady Bertilac glided gracefully into the room. As before, she wore the same pale robe with the simple green sash. As before, she was unadorned and her hair hung down, framing her face. As before, she was perfect. She stepped towards the bed with a small smile set on her face, the picture of a person looking forward to their favourite part of the day. "Good morning, m'lady," Gawain said from his seat by the fire, and Lady Bertilac let out a squeak as she leapt in shock, her head whipping round to face him. She hissed a curse that Gawain had only heard soldiers use, and he could not help but laugh as he grinned broadly at her. "You absolute arse, Sir Knight," she said once she'd recovered her composure. "I am quite sure that does not qualify as chivalrous behaviour. Do you have any idea how fast my heart is beating?" "I'm sorry, my lady," replied Gawain, still laughing. "I did not mean to ruin your stealthy sneaking." "Well, you did," she replied. A surly tone had entered her voice, but it was paired with that mischievous sparkle in her sapphire eyes, and Gawain knew there was no real venom in the bite. "Now what are you doing over there, and by all God's saints, why am I still waiting for my kiss? We did discuss this before, did we not?" Gawain rose and moved towards her mechanically. The moment of humour was gone, and he was left with the memory of what today really was, and what would follow soon after. He kissed her gently, but for the first time he wasn't captivated by her lips or seized with desire to make the kiss more. Lady Bertilac must have noticed, because as he pulled away she gave him a searching look of care-filled concern. "My goodness, what's the matter?" she asked. "You look as if the world's weight's just been pressed upon your shoulders. Is kissing me ever so much of a chore?" She said the last part with a flirtatious tone, but Gawain could tell it was just an effort to raise his spirits. He sank back into his chair and she drew up another to face him. The cloak of formality he'd worn for the last 2 mornings to protect himself from her advances was shredded and in tatters, but he could not bring himself to care. "I am sorry, m'lady," he told her, "and please don't take this as any slight on you. It is simply that my last day at your home is upon me. Tomorrow I must ride out to fulfil the pact I made and face the Green Knight. He is—" He trailed off, not quite sure how to put his fears into words. "He is— I do not think that I will come out of our meeting well. Or at all," he finished. "Oh, Gawain," replied Lady Bertilac, her voice a woven blend of sympathy and sadness. It occurred to him that this was the first time she had ever used his name before. The intimacy of that simple act pricked his eyes with tears, and they sat in silence for a long moment. Eventually she spoke again. "I can't pretend to know what it is you're going through," she told him. "All I can do is tell you how I would deal with a day like this, if it were my last free day upon this earth." "I would be glad to hear it, lady," Gawain replied, pulling a weak smile onto his face. "I would live it, before I lost it," she said. "You have a final day ahead of you, and then you shall not get another. So find all the joy and pleasure in this one that you can. I guarantee that in your last moments you'll be glad you lived this day well, instead of staring into a fire and feeling sorry for yourself." Gawain sighed deeply and nodded. He'd known that taking advantage of the day was the right thing to do, but he hadn't really had the heart. Somehow having someone else confirm it to him gave him a new energy and a spirit to strive. "You're right," he told Lady Bertilac. "You are right," he said again. "This day must be seized." "But how, exactly?" he asked, letting out a nervous laugh. Now it was here, and he'd finally elected to expend his energy productively. His mind had gone completely blank of any activity he wanted to pursue. "Well," said Lady Bertilac, the flirtatious tone returning to her voice, this time with weight behind it, "I can think of a few things." She stood from her chair and began to untie the sash at her waist to let the robe drop. Gawain could see what was coming, and the fatalistic part of his mind was fully inclined to let her continue and seize the day right there and then. But that little voice in his mind piped up again. "Is this the legacy you want to leave behind you? Is this the man that you want others to remember?" He thought of all the people who would be hurt if he let her continue, Lady Bertilac first among them, and he knew that the path in front of him would lead nowhere good. Gently, he took hold of her hands and stopped her. "Please," he asked her in a small voice. "Don't." She stopped, her face a carven image of shock and hurt. Gawain realized that to her this must be a ringing rejection that injured her to her core. He tried to think of something to say to soften the slight, but before he could she was already backing away, the hurt look on her face evolving to an affronted anger. "Not even here?" she asked him. "Not even now? Am I so beneath you? Or is there another, a buxom beauty from some backwater village who stole your heart, is it?" Gawain was shocked and was not certain how to react. Without thinking, he stammered out the first thing he could think of. "There's no other woman." He meant it as reassurance, but Lady Bertilac only seemed more upset by that. She stepped back from him and raised her hands to her head in frustration. "Oh, Gawain," she said, her voice utter disappointment. "That is the worst thing in the world you could say. Is there no empathy in your heart?" She asked the question quietly and with a deliberately flat tone that masked deep valleys of emotion. "Tread softly," said the voice in his head, but Gawain was not sure how. "My lady, I am sorry," he told her, desperate to make it as heartfelt an apology as he could utter. "You must understand, I leave tomorrow, for the very last time. It is not just you," the lady responded in an icy voice, "who is saddened by your departure." There was an uncomfortable silence, and now it was her turn to have her eyes pricked with tears. Gawain did not think anything he could say would make the moment better, so he elected to say nothing at all. "That's probably wise," confirmed his inner voice. At length the lady went on. Her voice was brittle, and Gawain made no attempt to interrupt her. "I understand that you are a man holding yourself in readiness for your own demise," she told him. "And I understand that that might make you think of your own actions and your own feelings. But I beg you not to ignore the feelings of others and how your actions will impact them." As she finished, Gawain realized that she had been addressing him with the same formal tones that he had used with her for the last few days, holding the stately words in front of her like a shield. "My lady," he said, imploring her to understand, "don't you see, it is precisely because I am thinking of others that I cannot—" He paused, trying to think of the most delicate way to phrase it. "Engage with you in this way. Please understand that I have seen—" "Please, Gawain," she said in a tone of exasperated exhaustion, the formality of before all melted away. "No more distractions, no more dissembling. No crafty stories of warriors or witches to waste away my moments of opportunity. Yes, I know that's what you were doing. Just answer. Do you want me? Or do you not?" The question was so raw, so unvarnished that Gawain knew it had cost her a lot to ask it. He considered a few artful ways of how he could respond, but eventually he decided that her honesty deserved honesty in return. "I want you," he told her. "But I cannot." There was another long silence while Lady Bertilac looked him right in the eye, and however much he wanted to look away, Gawain knew that this was not the moment to do so. Eventually she glanced aside, and Gawain continued. "In another world, or a different time, it would have been my honour to... We could have had something He couldn't find the way to finish what he was trying to say, but Lady Bertilac's eyes darted back to his, and he could see she understood. "I know," she said, in a still, small voice. She looked away again and nodded to herself. To Gawain it seemed like she was coming to some moment of acceptance and resolution within herself, and he let her have that moment undisturbed. Eventually she looked up again, and cautiously she said, "Gawain, I'd like to give you something, a gift to remember me by." Gawain was moved. "Lady," he told her, "I shall have no trouble remembering you for the rest of my days." He let out a wry laugh as he realised how silly this was given the circumstances. "However short they may be," he amended. Lady Bertilac let out a hiccuping little laugh of her own. "Thank you. Though I'd still like to give you something." "Very well," replied Gawain, "though, I beg you, nothing of too great value. I know it is customary for tokens of rings or necklaces, but I have nothing of worth to offer in return, and I fear something of great value may be wasted on me, for the short time that I have left." "No," said Lady Bertilac, "I had something quite different in mind. Something of little value, and yet of great worth." She reached down to the green sash at her waist and began to untie it, and Gawain thought she meant to undo the robe once again and reignite the fire that had burned them both just moments before. He worried needlessly, though, because she demurely held her robe closed with one hand while she removed the sash and held it out to him. "Here," she said in a soft voice. "For you." Gawain took it from her. Now that he looked at it closely, he saw that far from being a simple sash, it was an intricate girdle of incredible workmanship. Elaborate embroidery was worked all over the fabric, showing holly and oak leaves and twisting vines. At the very edges it had tiny flecks of woven gold throughout it so intricately that only the wearer would ever see the true labour that had been lavished on the making of it. It was clearly not an item made for showing off in grand, gaudy statements, but for the subtle, solid knowing of a thing well made. "Thank you," he told her, genuinely moved. "I have nothing to give you in return," he told her, but crossing towards her he kissed her gently on the cheek. "Thank you," he told her again. "I can see that this is truly a thing of great worth." "It is," she agreed, "but not in the way you think." Gawain looked at her confused and she went on. "That girdle has far more woven into it than just thread. It is said that whoever wears it cannot take harm or be killed by any weapon under heaven." There was a long silence while she let that sink in, and Gawain's mind began racing. "I can't promise it," Lady Bertilac went on, "but this may well be the thing that means that you can continue to remember me for a great many years to come." And before he could react, she kissed him on the lips, softly, but with a heartfelt strength. Without another word, she walked to the door and left, and through his stunned shock, Gawain knew that that last kiss was a kiss goodbye. Thank you for listening. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is a Settle Stories commission. Written and read for you by Jon Buckeridge. Story consultant was Miriam Sarin. Music was Tectonic by Saedra, downloaded via Uppbeat. It was a Parable Arts production.